So I'm gonna have to pull my engine out, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure it's the oil rings that are bad, but I actually won't know until I tear the engine apart, because if you look over here, get this out of the way. I went ahead and marked cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, cylinder 3 spark plug is either melted or broke off due to knock. And when looking inside of cylinder 3, there appears to be a lot of oil, so I'm thinking it's the rings that are gone. So I figured I'd make this DIY on how to rebuild your engine. This is a K24Z7 stock block, stock everything except for pistons, rods, and head studs. So first step, get your subframe off, drain all your fluids including your coolant, and then what you want to do is remove the transmission. Now if you don't know how, I have a clutch change video which teaches you how to remove the transmission. So go ahead and get the transmission off and place a jack under the engine to kind of give it support, and yeah, we'll get started. So here are pretty much all the tools that you're going to need for the engine rebuild, minus the engine crane, engine stand, and all that stuff. But you're going to need your basic socket set, your 6-point, 12-point. I'm pretty sure for the 12-point it's only for the head stud and also the rod bolts. So mainly everything else you're going to be using 6-point. You're going to want to use a breaker bar for getting the crank pulley off, and as well as all the other bolts that are, you know, relatively tight. You need your torque wrenches. I'm using a caliper right there just because I don't know where my micrometers are, but they're somewhere in the house, so I'm going to be using those to measure the clearances. And got right here some assembly lube. Assembly lube is for lubricating your journals so that when you're rebuilding your engine, the oil won't just drip back into the pan and leave your bearings dry on the first start. So I also actually have AMSOIL braking fluid. So this is just standard 30-weight oil with extra zinc in it to protect your engine for braking. And it also helps the piston rings seat better, because what happens is you need to use friction to seal the piston rings along the cylinders. And if you use synthetic oil actually works too well, in a sense that the rings won't wear down the peaks of the cylinder wall, so they won't really break in properly. So you want something that has a little more friction, like the braking oil I had there, and that'll help you break in your piston rings. So also I got a tube of Honda Bond, and this right here is ARP Ultra Torque Fastener Assembly Lube. So this is used for the head studs. What you're going to want to do is put them on the threads as you torque them down, and that's going to give you an accurate torque reading. So this right here is a special socket set. I got it from O'Reilly's, and this set is only used for getting the stock rod bolts off. The aftermarket ones are, or at least the ones we sell are, I believe it's an 11mm 12-point socket. So these look a little weird, but I will be posting up a picture of what it looks like at the store as well, so you know which one to buy. And gonna want to get some coffee filters as well. This is for cleaning off the bearings and other stuff like the crankshaft, camshafts. And what's good about these is it does not leave lint. So it's I don't know, a lot of people like to use them. I like to use them, it works really well. And along with that, you're going to want to get a lot of brake cleaner too. So I would pick up like maybe 4 or 5 bottles. Just keep them around, because you're going to be using them to clean the engine. And a few other tools I don't have right now, I have to find them somewhere in the garage, is a set of piston ring spreaders. So what those do is they're pretty much pliers, that special pliers that spreads the piston ring so you can slide them over the piston without scraping it. And also you're going to need a piston ring compressor, which compresses the rings so that you're able to slide them down the cylinder. And also you're going to need a cylinder hone, so you can get those at Harbor Freight. They're not that much. So they just attach to any drill and they hone out the cylinder walls, so that way you get your nice cross hatching, and that'll allow the piston rings to seat. Sorry, 2 more tools that I forgot to mention that are somewhat important is what's this? Angle torque gauge. So I got this from Amazon. It wasn't too much, but you're going to need those for like a few bolts in the engine. That's it. So what the instructions are going to be like are, let's say torque it down to 30 foot-pounds, and then torque it down an additional 120 degrees or something. So what this thing does is this goes onto the socket, this goes onto the wrench, and then what you do is this secures onto some sort of anchor, and then what you do is when you torque it, here, let me show you. It actually, so you zero it out first. God damn it. Well, it's kind of hard to do it with one hand. But anyways, you zero it out, and as you torque, do you see that needle over there? That needle is going to move along with how many degrees you're torquing it. So you want to go over to, let's say, 120, and then that will mean that you torqued the bolt an additional 120 degrees. So that tool is needed for just a small segment of it, and as well as a piston ring grinder. Now, a piston ring grinder is basically, I don't have it with me right now, I gotta go borrow it from a friend, but what it does is it has like a grinder wheel in the middle. You push the piston rings onto it, and then you grind it with the handle, and what that does is it grinds the piston ring so that it's flush, so it's not going to be grinded at a weird angle. But honestly, if you really wanted to, what you can do is take the piston rings, compress it onto some sandpaper, and then just pull and kind of grind it down yourself. Although it won't be perfect, it'll get the job done. So with that being said, you're also going to need some sandpaper. So I would recommend getting 600, 1000, 2000, something really fine. That way, after you grind down the piston rings, you're able to kind of deburr the edges without causing a lot of new scratches onto there. So you don't want to go too rough of a sandpaper. Just want to get something really fine. So I didn't really take a video of me removing the engine just because it's kind of boring and long, but it took around 30 minutes of actual work by myself. So it's definitely doable by yourself without any help. So the first step in me actually dropping the engine would be to remove all the wires from the engine. So unplug everything, disconnect all the coolant lines and whatnot, make sure nothing is hooked onto the engine, including the AC pump and the alternator. So I removed my alternator and unbolted the AC compressor, and then I held that in place with some bungee cord onto the chassis. That way it's not dangling. So after you do that, you're ready to drop it. Once you're ready to drop it, what you do is you get a 2-foot segment of steel chain, and you hook one end to the exhaust manifold stud and the other over the intake manifold stud. Now you want to try to keep the engine balanced on both sides so it doesn't tip over when you drop it. And if you do put it on a stud, what you want to do is put a little nut over it so that way the chain won't slip off and your engine won't drop onto the floor and crack. So go ahead and just do that. And if you want to put a bolt inside the intake manifold side, what you want to do is you want to thread it in a good amount so that way it's not just hanging by 1 or 2 threads. And the next step, what I did was I unbolted the side mount with the cherry picker already preloaded on the engine, so the engine's already being held up by the cherry picker. So after you do that, the engine should drop freely. So I dropped it straight down, and then I changed the chain from the exhaust stud to the AC compressor hole, so that way it is it is hanging all from the front. So that way I can lay the engine flat onto the floor. And then I had a small wooden cart underneath, so I dropped the engine onto that, and I laid it completely flat, and I proceeded to jack the car up as high as I could on one side. So that gave me enough clearance to slide the engine out. So with the engine out, then I mounted the engine crane bracket onto the bell housing before pulling it onto the engine stand. So those are standard M12 by 1.25. So you want to get bolts that are long enough so it reaches the end of the engine, the threads, but you don't want to go too deep, otherwise you'll be pulling out the threads. So you can use some washers and stuff to space it out, but you want to get a good amount of threads in there. So after you do that, you want to make sure all the bolts are tight, and then you pull the whole engine up, and then you slide it into the engine stand. So after you do that, then you can remove the engine crane, and the engine will be on the stand ready to be worked on. So yeah, thank you for watching this. I will end this first video and continue in the next one. Stay tuned.